Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This one's a personal favorite of mine every year. It's a video where I'm going to be going over a couple different auction draft strategies you guys can take heading into your auction drafts. By no means are these perfect strategies, or do you necessarily have to take any of these head on, but I think they're really great guidelines for different ways that you can approach your auction draft. And I think that in general, this is one of the things that is sort of lacking in the fantasy community. Personally, I think that auction drafts are by far way more fun than snake drafts. Just a lot more prep goes into it. They're longer, which I feel like that's honestly a plus as well, because draft night only comes once a year, right? Why not make it last? Otherwise, you got a snake draft that lasts an hour. And then on top of that, there's just a lot more prep work that needs to go into it. Every single team and every single league can get access to every single player, which is really the most fair way to go about your draft as well. But because of that, it sucks that there isn't a whole lot of great content out there, so that's sort of why I'm making that effort to put this out there for you guys. I've certainly employed all three of these strategies. I also love just doing a lot of sort of mock team builds with each of these strategies as well, just to sort of see, based off of the pre-draft values that are available on my platform, which different builds I like the most. Of course, your actual draft is not going to go exactly the way you plan it to. The pre-draft values are far from perfect, but they're kind of a good guideline to help you see what kind of roster you can actually end up building, and it's just a fun way to sort of iterate through which different roster builds you can do. So hopefully you guys find this video useful. I've got more auction draft content as well. I've got auction draft tips and tricks. I'll be doing more auction draft mock drafts and all that. So if you want access to that, make sure you go watch those videos. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy this one. Let's get into it. So the first strategy that I think you guys will hear is probably the most common, honestly, in auction drafts, and it's honestly the easiest to pull off. It's going to be the aggressive strategy. It's sort of like a studs and duds approach, right? It would sort of be the equivalent of basically trading a bunch of your middle round draft picks in a snake draft for an additional first round pick. What that ends up meaning is that you end up with like 2 to 3 really high end assets, and then pretty much everyone else on your team is just sort of scraping the bottom of the barrel, hence the studs and duds name that people sort of dub this with. Typically, if you're going to go towards this approach, I do recommend budgeting less capital towards your bench here than you would with another build. You definitely want to make sure that you're emphasizing, you're all in here, right? So you would definitely want to be emphasizing just prioritizing the actual output from your starting lineup, understand that you're going to have to fill in the pieces should injuries arise and all that. You really are just sort of gambling all in on a few players and hoping they can carry you, and then you're just trying to fill the holes in regardless. I like to say that this is probably the easiest strategy to pull off because there's a lot less fluctuation in terms of how much players are going to go through, especially early on in the draft. These guys are predictably going to go for a ton of money. You've got guys that are supposed to go for 30 to 35% of your auction budget in the early first round. You can pretty much count on that. You can pretty reliably just get out of the first 5 to 10 minutes of your draft with 2 really good players. So it's pretty reliable just in terms of the fact that 10 minutes into the draft, you're going to be about out of money, and then you just have to sort of piece it together. So it's very easy to recreate rosters. The teams that you build in like your spreadsheet mock drafts are going to be a lot more replicatable in this approach than they will be in the other ones. I also personally find that this approach works a lot better in smaller leagues where waivers are more fruitful. Generally, when you're in a really small league, it is those studs, those like guys that are lapping the field of the position that end up really making the difference for you and winning your league. And then there's just enough stuff on waivers, enough decent players that you can fill out that you're going to be able to fill in the holes there. And I think it's generally a really good approach in 8-team leagues. 10-team leagues is a little pretty solid as well, especially with smaller rosters as well. So just know your league. Like if you're in a 14-team league and you do this, you go with 2 guys, the entire rest of your team is going to suck. And if one of those 2 guys goes down, your entire season is over because there's not a lot on waivers if you're in a 14-team league. But in an 8 or a 10-team league, I think this is definitely something you could do, and you can kind of pull it off in a 12-team league as well. Just make sure you're going to be super active with waivers and everything because you're going to have holes to fill if you go with that approach. And then just as an example here, I'm going to do this for all of the draft strategies I present for you guys, but I like to give you guys an example roster that you guys could sort of construct if you were to take this approach. So for the aggressive strategy, I sort of wanted just to give you guys an example build you guys could go towards if you were to try to leave your draft with basically the first and second overall draft pick. So if you wanted to leave your draft with Ja'Marr Chase and Bijan Robinson, obviously that's the fun part about auction drafts. This is the only format you can actually do that in. But if you're going to do that, you'll see the entire rest of your roster doesn't have a whole lot to go with. In that scenario, I again recommend that you're going to be budgeting $1 for your kicker and defense. You should be doing that regardless. And then, of course, you should budget effectively $1 for every single bench spot, right? So then you're just going to try and fill out the rest of your starting lineup with some players that are good, but obviously not great. So in this build, you've got Bijan and Ja'Marr Chase. Those are going to be the anchors of your roster. I then added in Bo Nix, David Montgomery, Garrett Wilson, Sam Laporta, and Cortland Sutton. So as you can see, a decent starting lineup here. This is actually pulled from pre-draft values from a 12-team PPR league in ESPN. So that's where all these pre-draft values are coming from. Of course, there's no guarantee that these players cost exactly that amount, but it's a good sort of guideline, again, for like what kind of team you could build if you take this approach. Not a bad team by any means, right? You've got obviously the first and second overall pick, and your starting lineup has really no holes here. So the way you're running into problems is if you have an injury to either Bijan or Jamar Chase with this roster, your bench is certainly going to be lacking there. But you can see you can go and basically get the first and second overall pick and then fill out a pretty capable starting lineup. Especially favorable here where you only have 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and 1 flex spot. If you've got a bigger starting lineup, this gets a little bit tougher to replicate. But pretty solid roster here. Again, you could totally go back at the end of this video as well, look at all 3 different roster types here, see which roster you guys like the most. I also highly recommend you guys go to your platform, look at the pre-draft values, and build out your own templates like this and see which ones you like, just so you can sort of go into your draft with some sort of a plan in terms of how you want to attack things. The next strategy here is going to be called the passive draft strategy. This is the polar opposite, right? What you're doing here is you are looking to effectively fill your entire roster with good but not great players, right? It typically means that you're waiting out the tier 1 of players in your draft. Then you're going to have the most money in your entire league at a certain point in the draft, and there's going to be at least some point in those like middle round areas where you effectively own the draft and you're just drafting every single player that you want, and that does give you a lot of power at a certain point in the draft. It can certainly help you sculpt the team you want, get those like value players that you've definitely been targeting all off season long. It does certainly give you a very deep roster. I also actually find that this strategy ends up being the riskiest. I know that's a little bit contradictory, right? You'd think that if you go with a aggressive draft strategy, you're putting all your eggs in one basket, right, or 1 or 2 baskets, and that gives you a lot of risk going into the season. But the problem with this draft strategy is that if multiple teams take this approach, you end up where you have like 2 or 3 teams just significantly outbidding each other on mediocre players, and you'll get to the point where you're spending really high-end draft capital on a player that's not special by any means. For example, in my home league draft last year, values are a little bit mucky because we've got keepers and everything, but we ended up seeing a Rachaad White go for the same amount as Jahmyr Gibbs, just because we had a couple teams go with this same draft strategy. Rachaad White got bid up quite a bit because he was the last running back that you could start, and these 2 teams had way too much money left. It actually still made sense for them to go out and bid them, but it was a clear demonstration that they'd missed value at some point in the draft. So there is risk. You want to make sure that you're probably the only team in your league doing this. Because really the worst thing that can happen in your draft is that you leave the draft with too much money. If you leave with money in your pocket at the end of the draft, it's going to certainly suggest that you just didn't maximize your upside there. So generally, I find this strategy works a little bit better in larger leagues where depth is harder to come by. It generally means that waivers are not going to be very valuable as well. So having added depth actually gives you a lot of power during the course of the season in those leagues, because when someone's running back goes down, if you've got 1 or 2 on your bench you can play, you've got a lot of trade value there. So it's sort of your way that you can sort of tier up by comboing players and get yourself those superstar players, being like sort of opportunistic as things present themselves over the course of the season. But there's a lot of risk associated with this. I find that this is probably the hardest one to recreate as well. Like sometimes I make these teams in a spreadsheet, they look really great, and then if I try and actually go out and do a mock draft with 11 other real people and recreate it, it's really hard to end up with a team that you like. So just be wary of that. I'll show a roster here next, but just keep in mind that, again, this is assuming pre-draft values. And when you get to this point in the draft, these like middle-tier players, their pre-draft values tend to be a lot more variable. So don't get too excited if you like this roster. So this passive roster here, I started things off with Kyler Murray at quarterback. You can see I basically went with like tier 2 and tier 3 guys all across the board. We also have a solid bench piece, and I budgeted $3 for every single bench player. So that does certainly give you a lot better bench than you would if you're budgeting $1 per bench player. We've got 2 really good running backs here, but nobody that's a tier 1 guy, right? We've got Omarion Hampton and Chase Brown. Running back room that I'd be more than happy with, but of course there's potential for those guys to get bid up a lot more than I think you would see with those higher end guys. Like I wouldn't be shocked at all if we saw Omarion Hampton go for $50 in an auction draft, just because he, for so many people, belongs in a tier higher than where he's being drafted right now. You're not going to see Bijan go for 90, even though his pre-draft value is 70, right? So the pre-draft value is a lot more predictable for those high-end guys. At receiver, we've got three guys that are really solid in the starting lineup between Marvin Harrison, DK Metcalf, and Devontae Adams. Also have Garrett Wilson on the bench. That's great. And we were also able to go out there and get George Kittle with this build. So, if you look at the starting lineup, you'll say, hey, that's a pretty good lineup. I would remind you that if you're looking at this, you effectively don't have a first-round pick, and your highest drafted player by snake draft would be Chase Brown here, typically being drafted like the beginning of the third round. So with this approach, you're basically punting your first and second round pick to have a lot of third and fourth and fifth round draft picks, which is not the end of the world. There's a lot of risk associated with that. You need some of those guys to outperform their ADP because you're going to have a hard time winning your league if you don't have a player that's lapping the field. Like if you don't have a Saquon Barkley, a Jamar Chase, or one of those caliber of players, even someone that just like ends up cracking the top 5 at the position, you don't need the guy that's going to lap the field. You just need some studs to really help anchor your roster if you're actually going to win the full thing. And you're going to need somebody that you take here to actually significantly overperform if you want to go all the way and win your league. So, I know this roster looks okay, but typically this is not a strategy I necessarily recommend. It's just sort of something to keep in mind. I think there's a lot of risk associated with it too, just because you can easily end up in a trap where you have way too much auction money left along with 2 other teams in your league, and then you're spending $60 on George Kittle because he's the best player available, and there's nobody else worth anything to you. So just be wary of that, but this is an example of the roster you could build if things sort of shook out the way they're supposed to, at least. And the final draft strategy here is going to be called the balanced draft strategy, and you probably guessed it. I would call this a hybrid between the first 2 approaches. So what you really end up seeing is you end up with a roster that looks really similar to a kind of roster that you could get in a snake draft, but what I typically recommend here is that you draft like 1 high-end star player or 2 lesser stars. So an equivalent would be like either take a guy that's supposed to go at the 101 or take 2 players that would be going like at the 1-2 turn. Not necessarily exactly like that, but it gives you a similar value to what you'd see in a snake draft. But it gives you the opportunity to find values throughout the entire draft, right? Like if you go all in on 2 really high-end players, when a value presents itself for a player that would have been drafted in round 4, you don't have any money left, right? So you're not going to get that value, as to where if you only go with 1 guy or 2 like tier 2 players, you're going to have plenty of money left to actually go and capitalize on values as they present themselves. It also still gives you that star power that you need to get you over the top and win your league. And of course, it also helps alleviate the risk of leaving your draft with too much money. I highly recommend at least spending some money early on in the draft. Don't be a guy that's sitting there with your 200 auction draft dollars, 20 players into the draft. That's how you get in a hole really quickly. And honestly, this is sort of like if you were in a snake draft but got to pick where in each round you wanted to pick. It's not exactly how this goes, but like it allows you to access every single player. But, sometimes if you're in a snake draft, right, like personally, I love Brian Thomas. I'm a little bit higher on Brian Thomas than consensus. I'm willing to take him at like pick 11 or even pick 10 in like a 10-team league. Typically, he's going at like pick 15, right? So I would obviously get better value if I had the 15th pick than the 11th. But sometimes that's just, you have to make the pick there where you wouldn't necessarily want to because it's not the highest by ADP. You can make sure that you're getting players at the optimal value all along the way if you sort of take this approach. And it does tend to be one that I generally like. Now we'll show an example roster here. So this is an example roster you could build if you took that balanced approach. So for me, you'll see here I started this draft with Brian Thomas and Derrick Henry Jr. So Brian Thomas Jr. and Derrick Henry. That's sort of me taking the go get 2 tier 2 players, guys that aren't necessarily going at the top of round 1, but guys that are fairly rock solid superstars for your roster. And you can see that didn't actually cost a whole lot, right? Like you get those 2 guys for $93. For context, you saw that Jamar Chase and Bijan were going for $70, so not a whole lot more than just one of those guys. And then I had plenty of money left over to go get a lot of guys. You can see that I budgeted $2 per bench spot. That's typically a rule of thumb I like to have. It gives you enough flexibility that you can still get bench players that are good, but it doesn't pigeonhole you into just really sacrificing the quality of your starting lineup. You can see at quarterback here we got Bo Nix. We got Amarian Hampton as our second running back. Really good receiving room behind Brian Thomas. We got Ladd McConkey and JSN. So in a lot of ways, we have 3 second-round picks at wide receiver, and then we got some upside there with Tedero McMillan as our 1 bench spot. We had a little bit of money left over. So I like this roster a lot. This is sort of so far my favorite one of the 3. But again, I think you can do this exercise on your own. I highly recommend you just sort of play around in Excel or whatever tool you want to use to just sort of see which kind of rosters you can build based off the pre-draft values on your platform. And it'll give you an idea of how you want to approach your draft and which sort of strategies you want to take going into it. So just to recap here, I personally tend to recommend a more balanced approach to people except in extreme cases. In an 8-team league, of course, you should take an aggressive approach. There's going to be a lot of really good players on waivers. Just go get the studs, right? Like get Ja'Marr Chase, get Bijan, get Josh Allen, get Trey McBride. Just go get all those guys. And then if the rest of your team is all $1, you're going to be just fine, right? Because there's going to be plenty of value on waivers. I think you'll do just fine in that scenario. There's some caveats to that as well. I think typically it's really common to see early on in these auction drafts that drafters are just a little bit scared early, and you'll see elite players go for cheaper than they should. So like I know I showed, for example, Bijan and Ja'Marr Chase with pre-draft values of around $70 on ESPN. It wouldn't be shocking at all if you were, the 101, Ja'Marr Chase gets nominated. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see him go for like 55, right? Just because people don't want to be the guy that is the poorest in the league. It's scary to do that, especially with the first pick in the draft. I see it happen all the time where the very first player nominated goes for too little. If that's the scenario, be aggressive. Don't be passive about it, and don't be scared. Make sure you take advantage of that. And just one option to sort of play around with as well. It's kind of like a hybrid between the balanced and the aggressive approach. I typically see that second-round caliber players are often just way cheaper than first-rounders. Like, I just showed the roster like right before this. I'll go back to it real quick, but like, so like look at that. We've got JSN, Ladd McConkey. Both those guys are typically being drafted in like the late second, early third. Those guys are like $30 compared to the guys that are in the first round, like Ja'Marr Chase, CeeDee Lamb. Those guys are like $70. So just keep in mind that you can get 2 round 2 players for the price of 1 round 1 player. You can sort of load up your roster on those like round 2 talents, and it's just sort of like something to consider. Like, would you rather have 4 second round picks or 2 first round picks? Not necessarily saying there's a right answer there, but just keep that in mind. If you don't love the values of some of the players going into the first round, then just prioritize those guys in the second round. Make sure you're still getting really good players, right? You don't want to be too passive and have no star power on your team, but I do find that some of those like second round caliber players end up being some of the best values in these auction drafts. So that'll do it for some auction draft strategies for you guys to consider heading into your drafts this season. Up next, I'll be doing a mock auction draft for you guys to review as well. Hopefully you guys found this video useful. If you want more content like this, let me know in the comments below. I know it's really tough to find good auction content out there, so I'm trying to help you guys out and provide it. I love auction drafts. I try to do as many of them as I can. Most of the main leagues I focus on are auction drafts now just because I think they're so much more fun. They require so much more prep work, and there's just a lot more stuff that can happen, and it's just a lot more exciting for me going into an auction draft than it is for a snake draft. So super stoked about this. If you guys want to make sure you get more content like this, there's going to continue to be at least 3 videos a week all throughout the off season. I keep saying 3 videos a week, but honestly we've been putting out a video a day for a while now. There's going to be content just continuously coming out. We got a lot to get through, and we're getting really close to draft season here. Hall of Fame game in 3 days. I'm recording this on the 28th, so we got a lot of content coming up. It's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're going to win some leagues together if you stick around. And if you made it this far in the video, I know it was a long one, so thanks for watching. Give it a thumbs up if it helped you out. It just helps me know that I'm doing a good job and helps the channel grow and all that. So I really appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you with the next one. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.